Good afternoon. It is February 9th, 2025, and it's the fifth Sunday in the ordinary season. And today in the Gospel, we have that image of Jesus and Peter at the seashore, where Jesus tells Peter to put down the nets, and they bring in this huge catch of fish. And the ending in the Gospel is a reminder that we are called to be fishers of people. But the reminder is not just for Peter, but too often in our church today, we expect the priest to do it, the deacon to do it, the bishop to do it, the sisters, the brothers, and we forget that this is a calling to all of us by our baptism. We're all called to be fishers of people. And part of that sense of fishing is, do we have that relationship? Like any of you who have ever gone fishing know that if you don't have the right bait, you're not going to catch anything. Certain fish take to certain bait, and they totally ignore different bait. So what do I have to know? And the thing is, the fisherman needs to understand the fish. There's a difference between trout, there's a difference between salmon, there's a difference between halibut, there's a difference between all kinds of fish. What am I fishing for? Do I know that fish? The same in our relationship as being fishers of people, and part of that is bringing the people to Christ. And in our church today, we all know people who were born and raised Catholics, but for whatever reason have left the church, they've walked away. And what are we doing to reach out to them? And of course, part of our challenge is to respect the dignity of the person, but also to invite them to come home. I can't make them come home, but if I haven't sat down and talked with them, how am I going to get them to come home? Come back to the table. Come back to that relationship with Jesus. Then oftentimes people will say, well, I have a relationship with Jesus, but I don't have to go to church. Well, wait a minute. Jesus went to the synagogue on the Sabbath, as was his custom. So if Jesus had to go to church every week, why don't you and I? What makes us better than Jesus Christ? And Jesus set us an example so that we might do what he has done. And so part of our understanding is this invitation that God has, that he wants all to be saved, not just some, right? Not just a few. He wants all of us to be one with him as he is one with the Father. And he doesn't want to lose any that has been given to him. And so how are we helping in that process? And part of that is to get to know the fish. Why is this person not going to church anymore? Why is this person walked away from the faith? Why are the people of God the way we are? But that means I have to work on them. And it's one at a time. It's not in huge numbers. But I got to get to know them. And I have to know why. What's going on in their lives? And I found all kinds of different reasons. Part of it is they don't know the teaching of the church. Part of it is they don't understand the teaching of the church, and they don't understand the whys behind the teaching of the church. Some of it is they're mad at the church, right? Or they don't understand the relevance of what we're trying to teach. The other part of it is sometimes it's just, they've given up, right? I was talking to a couple of people, and they were talking about they stopped being Catholic and they stopped referring to themselves as Catholic because they were seeing themselves as hypocrites. They said they were Catholic, but they didn't go to church. They said they were Catholic, but they didn't believe in the teachings of the church. They said they were Catholic, but. And so they saw that as hypocrisy instead of what it really is. We are all sinners in need of God's mercy and forgiveness. We don't always do what we know is the right thing to do. And sometimes that's because we never understood why we were supposed to be doing it in the first place. We gather on Sunday to give praise and worship to God. The key word in there is worship. Do we offer sacrifice? And what's the sacrifice we make when we go to church? We get up, we show up, we participate. How hard is that? That's the sacrifice we offer back to God for our salvation. The other reason we go to church is for community, because we're not alone, and we can't do this alone. This is about the community that gathers together to celebrate. The other part is teaching, striving to discover what it is that God is trying to call us to. And sometimes we have that great clarity, and sometimes we don't have that clarity. But the challenge is, am I working on it? Am I working on it? Not because I'm going to get it right, because most of the time we get it wrong. Or we're doing the best we can at that moment in our lives. But we have to remember that God loves us unconditionally, and he cares about each and every one of us all the time. But he also works through us because we are the hands and the feet. And so we stand there and we cast our rod. We have to make sure we got the right bait, because if I don't understand that person out there, if I don't understand that fish, how do I bring them back to the table of God? How do I invite them back into that embrace of Jesus Christ? And I need to understand them. I need to know their story. I need to know why they've chosen the things that they've chosen. And I have to respect their right to choose, but sometimes we're there to guide, direct, correct, help. Sometimes, and I've had this lots of times, where people say, well, I can't do this because, as Catholics we believe X. And I'm going, since when did we start believing that? Because a lot of times it's when we don't even know the teachings of our own church. We might have known it at one time, but if we never really thought about it or practiced it or reflected on it, do we really know what the teaching of the church is? And so the challenge that we have is to get to know the fish. Get to know those that have walked away. Get to know those that are weak in their faith and encourage them and help them. I had a young person ask me about, I've got a friend who's, interested in church. They ask a lot of questions. I've invited them to come to church, but they never show up. My comment was, have you ever driven by their house half an hour before Mass and said, come on, get in with me, we're going to church. And afterwards we're going for burgers. Because we all know that bribery works. But if we never go with them, I know for myself, when I left home and went to university, that first year and walking into the church was very difficult. You're walking in alone. I don't know anybody. Here I am by myself. But in the back of my head, I had my father's voice saying, Kevin, the best place to find a girlfriend is at church. You'll notice it didn't exactly work out that way for me, but, I had my father's voice in my head. But I went to Saskatoon, went to university there, walked in the church, and it was uncomfortable. When I moved to Medicine Hat, it was the same thing. I often wanted to find out when my aunt and uncle were going to church, so I would meet them for church. And there was a bonus, because Aunt Katie always made sure that I come back to the house to have brunch with them. When I went to Calgary, well, I was on my own again. And then you got to find somebody. But the one thing I learned is, in Saskatoon, I volunteered to be an usher. Is the best way to meet people. In Medicine Hat, I volunteered to be an usher. Best way to help people. Best way to meet people. Same thing happened in Calgary. How do we meet people? How do we get to know the people of God? And that's how we form community, is we have to put ourselves out there a little bit. Here I am, Lord, I come to do your will. And what God does is place the people in our lives that can really make a difference in our lives. And sometimes we're the people that should be making a difference in other people's lives. That's why we're all called to be fishers of people, to welcome home, to welcome into that deeper relationship with Christ. It is February 9th, 2025. It's the fifth Sunday in Ordinary Time. May God watch over you, protect you, guard you all the days of your life.